that's a nice segue to what I'm going to be talking about, because I'm going to be talking about my experience in teaching in large classes, but I'm also going to be talking about the students that are so important in working with them in large classrooms. So when I came to UMass, which was a long time ago, not as long as many of you, but a long time ago, I taught one lecture a year at a med school. I worked at UConn Med School previously, and it was a huge lecture, 400, and I taught the alcohol and drugs lecture to first-year medical students. So it's like my canned heat. I could get up and do this, and it was just the one thing I had to do a year. And I loved that, and so then I was hired the year the criminal justice program started at UMass, and they looked around, who's going to teach criminology? And they're like, she teaches large lectures. So teaching a large lecture once a year versus across the whole semester is a far different beast. And I learned that in my first semester here. I had 100 students in the old Snowden auditorium before it was fixed up. And I can show you about the era in which that was. Do you guys remember? And I used these tools. I was a little desperate in there. And the VCR tape. Now, we've been told recently that we need to put these on discs, and some of the faculty in my department were grumbling, and I said, oh, come on, you cannot conceivably walk into a classroom carrying one of these. It takes away a lot of your credibility now. But of course, I have them lined all over my office. My office is a place of somewhat, relative antiques. But I had to use these things because I was using a chalkboard that was up on a stage. It was a tilted seating. The chalkboard
away.
That chalkboard fell down.
I had to get a whiteboard brought back into Snowden.
Yeah, the chalkboard fell down, and it was on an angle, and I'm trying to write, and then it fell off the stage, and I'm like, I just can't go my first semester here. Then Neil Brunson had said something. He was acting dean at the time, and he's like, would you like to be on a committee to refurbish Snowden? And I don't know if I can do this. But I've also taught in Healy. I taught the large lecture for about 8 years. So I taught in Healy. I taught in the small science. In criminology, we don't max out beyond 100 in that class, which is great. We can. What I do now more, and which is another important feature of large classes, is I organize the TAs for the large classes because I'm the graduate director. And they take a load of those classes. They take a portion of students and carry 40 students, and I oversee them. And I enjoy that. But what I loved about large lectures, and when I've done being graduate program director, which is going on, what I'd like to return to it because it's bringing students into a major. And that was my goal. I decided after the whole chalkboard incident that I'm really here to make these students enthusiastic about criminal justice and criminology, and how best can I do that? How can I engage them? And so what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit culture dependent, right? I'm a sociologist. It's about getting folks out in the social world, and it's discipline dependent. So it's very different, teaching biology, teaching English, what we do. Everybody comes into criminology and sociology with life experience, which is fantastic. So we wanted to use that. Stylistically dependent, I'm a fast talker, I'm all over the place, I talk with my hands. What I was comfortable with, and I'll tell you some of the things I had to tone down in my personal style because it's, a range of students. And I would always try to do this blended style where I'd never lecture the whole time, whether it's an hour and 15-minute course or a 50-minute class. Do not lecture the whole time. I try to break it down into some kind of exercise, group activity, guest, peer-to-peer. We actually call it partners in sociology because that's the language that we would use. And my rule of thumb, I do use PowerPoint. I'd like to use Prezi. I don't know if many of you know Prezi. It's an interactive web tool. It's fantastic, but if you get in a classroom that has any kind of web interruption, it can be problematic storing your Prezis, updating and opening your Prezis. So I would use PowerPoints, but again, with live links, but rule of thumb is never more than 7 slides, no matter the, and you'll see that today. And the classroom environment is something I learned after the Snowden experience in teaching in small science. So this was me on Friday. I came in with my daughter, and we were going from classroom to classroom, and I couldn't get into a lot because there were students in the classroom. And so this is a picture of new Snowden redone with the students in it. This is obviously a large lecture, and I kept it blurry for anonymity of the classroom. I don't know who was teaching it. I don't know what class this is, but a lot of empty seats. Somebody sort of. There's a range of students you get in large lectures, probably on a Friday afternoon, and I decided that sort of organization of a classroom was not a great organization for teaching criminology. So this is the largest classroom I could get in on Friday to take the picture of. I like these big, huge, flat classrooms where students could turn around 360, move their chair, organize into small groups. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. 10 groups of 10 or 8 groups of 10 and have 8 exercises, a variation on a theme where they're talking to each other, and then there's always a brave person in the 8 that's willing to, present the results. And so I love this feeling of a real classroom, and there's some nice classrooms in the Wheatley building, and they're so nice that there's smart rooms and whiteboards are there, and so you can go from your PowerPoint to your whiteboard to your PDF and pull up clips, and it's a neat technology. And I learned a lot of that teaching in that room because I was doing a point-to-point class with Lowell. So I really like that, the ability to go round and round. Now students in large lectures, let me back up. What kind of, to be specific, what are my key things to keep the students active and engaged? The small group work that I mentioned, peer-to-peer, which is the partnering exercise where you have them write a paragraph, they hand the paragraph off, they read each other's paragraph and discuss it. I would do student panels, again with sociology, criminology, these are lived experiences. And some people go to a large lecture to hide, some people go because they're interested in the major and they have something to share and they're dying to share. They don't need me up in front all the time. So I would do a student panel, and this was always very successful. I'd have students sign up, and then they'd sign up to present about a life experience related to the criminal justice system. And it was amazing. I mean, this is where the students teach the other students what students signed up to talk about. It's students who was a district attorney, lawyers, somebody who got a DWI, driving under the influence, somebody that was on probation. It was the real range, probation officers, and they talked about their experience. And so the student panel day is always a really exciting day, and thus other students get to ask questions. And I like that a lot. The other thing I always do is a debate. And in the debate, they get to pick the topic. So we've done the legalization of drugs, the death penalty, they're introductory students, so there's these big issues. And here again, the students get to volunteer. Do they want to participate? Pro and con. The winner of the debate gets 3 extra credits. The loser gets 2. The audience votes on the winner of the debate, and if they write a paragraph, they get 1 extra credit point. So everybody's participating. So that's something else I like to do. Current events, this is another voluntary thing on once a week we'd have current events, again because it's sociology, criminology, and students can volunteer to do that. And I try to make the volunteering as open as possible. I don't want to alienate folks that have English as a second language issue. I try to encourage if you want to write. So if you didn't want to do a current event but you wanted to write about one, if you were more comfortable, you could hand something in written. And these things credit is always attached and it's always coming to me. And then the final thing I like to do is bring in guests, experts from the field, because they're all over the place in Boston, and the students love to have that exposure. I like to bring in alumni in particular, because that's really neat for them, and the alumni love coming back, and so you give them a parking pass, and that's all they really, that's it. So I'm sorry I missed that. And then, so the students in the large lecture, so my goal is always, in all my classes, is to teach to the middle. I do the best I can with you're always going to have these fantastic students that sit front and center every day, raise their hand for every question, are engaged or nodding. And then, you'll have the folks the 1 folk or 2 folk or 3 that lumber in 45 minutes in the class and sit down in the front row and ask questions that have, and you're trying to balance this with 100 students, trying to be, calm and polite, and it happens, and it eventually gets to the point where you say, can I talk to you after class? I learned that you don't never call anybody out in a large lecture, so can I talk to you after class? And I'll talk to the student, I'll say, it's sort of disruptive if you're going to come in late, why don't you sit more towards this side of the room or more towards the back or wherever you can get to, and then sort of pick up where we are instead of disrupting. But what I found with all that work, pulling aside, come to my office, let's figure this out, is sometimes these people disappear by the end of the semester for whatever reason. They might be auditing the class, but when you have, I don't know if you found this, that there's some students that are sort of disruptive, and then they're just, and maybe it's the nature of my discipline, again, sociology, criminal justice. But I found that if I spent a lot of effort over, the 8 years of doing this with these folks, at the end, we're looking at the grade. They didn't turn in a term paper. They're missing this. They had some attendance, and they just sort of gone. And then I sort of had to rethink, it's good to spend some time to try to figure out, but why, well, what about all these people who are really trying to make an effort and are participating in this, that, and the other thing? And these folks do fine. They're self-advocates. They know, how to read a syllabus, so this is the range that I really think is important to sort of get across what we're trying to learn. And one of the things I do for my large lectures, I always have them write a paper, and this is where teaching assistants come in and very important as well. I do a very structured assignment, so they can't just pull something off the web. It's so specific in terms of the topics of the paper and how the paper's graded. And if the topics provide a point structure that the TAs can look at and say it's there or not there, and then I go in and look at the TA's comments and I'm able to assess the paper as a whole. Because I agree that reading, writing, and speaking, and for sociology, those are the things: reading, writing, and speaking, and a little bit of poise, maybe classroom dynamics. I've also found, so you get the front and center students, the disruptive students, that in large lectures you're going to have a high profile student as well. And again, you never call these people out. So one year I had the police chief's son from my town in my class, and I was like, oh my God, he's going to do great. He did not do great. Not at all. I think his father forced him to take the class. I was in shock. One time, the reason I have the students do the current events instead of me is oftentimes the current events touch their lives. And I learned this during the Jeffrey Curley case, the little boy that was murdered. It was probably the third year I was here. And the students were all talking about it, and I was facilitating this discussion, and the student came up to me afterwards and said, he was my neighbor. And I said, you should have been the one to bring that to us. So I would limit that. So the whole, you need to be aware of your teaching classes this size, especially in this, again, discipline dependent in the social sciences, sensitive to these things. They're in the class for a reason. And let the students lead. So the other thing, keep it lively. So for the debate, I always wear my graduation gown and I carry a gavel and I stand in the front because they get wild, because there's the audience and, so sort of have that, I think that helps and to engage students. I've learned that I think I'm so funny, but 100 students don't always think I'm so funny. The jokes can really, you've got a very diverse classroom. You have to, so jokes are, towards the end of the semester, I get a little looser with my humor because they kind of start to get me, that I want them to be engaged. I love the discipline. I do believe that technology is a must in a large lecture, whether it's a YouTube video or a news clip. I do music. I do audio. They engage to audio. If there's a story you could get on NPR that's just audio, they will lock down and they will listen to it. And it helps when you teach a fascinating or inherently interesting subject matter. I've done field trips with the large section. I took them all to the theater district once to see a show that was related to the debate topic. And the hardest part of that was the buses. But what I would recommend for large lectures is for sociologists, it's all about getting out in the social world. I take them around campus. I walk around campus and we look at things. We have the campus police come and we go with them. So you try to, just get them up. I told you I dress up. In the gown and stuff. One time I was a serial killer because we had class on Halloween and we had a Halloween costume. So I put little cereal boxes all over me and went in. They liked that. I was much younger. I would not do that now. I like to change the pace and make sure that students get credit, especially in that environment. So these are some pictures from one of my debates early on. And these are just the two teams. And this was in one of the large classrooms, and then the judges were all in the middle. But I just would say, when they're engaged, they're happy. And they were. They had, so this is a whole thing, like they all did their research, and I think this was the death penalty debate, and there was a couple presenters, and we had the mock, and what I like to see is them happy to a certain extent, They're not always happy with their grades, they're not always, but, when they're happy, I think that they're learning these essential topics. And I think the last thing I'll say is, besides I do use Blackboard to back up all my notes and things like that, is when you have a class this size and you're teaching the social sciences, you should tend to grade on a curve. Because if they're all doing terrible, that it says something about what's going on in the classroom, but, to sort of keep things on balance with a large group of students, sort of like the normal curve for the students that I showed. And that helps me stay in check, but it also, everything is on a curve, sort of when you're teaching these large lectures. So I hope that was sort of helpful. Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk about it again.
How many TAs do you have, and how many hours do they work with you?
For that size class, 1, 2. Now they have. We just.
I'm just curious.
One. I used to have one.
One, and that's a full time, so that's 20 hours a week or whatever it is that they allow now.
Half.
Huh?
Half. 9 hours. Now we have. We're teaching. We've done going into the large intros for large sociology, and that's the one I coordinate the graduate students for. There's 3 9 hours, so they split the class across 3 graduate students, and then there's 1 lead graduate student who helps coordinate the 3 TAs.
And that's like a 300.
I think 250 is the size of that class.
Can you tell us in detail how you structured the debate? So
Yes.
like how many people and the sides, and because I didn't
Well,
get a chance to,
so I
like,
try
dive
to,
into
as
that.
many people that are willing and sign up for teams. And then if there's one team that's loaded and one team that's not, I'll go over and talk to the team for the people, you want to be on pro team, but do you really just want to
What
participate
sort
in the
of
debate?
works well in terms of maximum numbers?
So I think that this one topped out at about, 12 on each team. You can't even see them all, but, and that worked well. They have to do research, they have to organize it, they have to support each other, they're going to do handouts.
And they're doing this in class?
No, they do some of the debate teams, actually, that's why they get more extra credit. They have to do some outside preparation.
They have to do outside work.
And I called one of my friends who was on the debate team in college, because I had no idea, and I got the actual structure that the pro team comes, and then the con team can do a rebuttal, then the pro team responds, and then the con team, no questions from the floor. Same thing, then the con team goes. And that's a unique format for them. They're not used to not being able to interrupt each other and when it's a heated topic and fight. So they have to, and that's why I have my gavel, and that's why, to keep sort of them organized. But they follow that format, and then they get to regroup.
Okay.
And I can send you this, because I have it. I do it in all my
Yeah, and
classes.
then you have judges, and then you have an audience.
The audience is the judge.
Okay.
I'm just
Mhm.
the person with the gavel,
Mhm.
trying to keep them,
And
on
you have the
task.
audience
I time
vote
them.
somehow.
What?
You have the audience like respond or vote or?
We do open it up at the end. The one thing I think I do with the big classes is open it up at the end for audience question to only a couple, because it can get out of control.
Yeah.
They have to direct it at a team, and that's the only team that can respond. They can't just get up, what about this? They have to say, pro team, you stated in your argument, can you tell us more about that? So it's using that formal, it's very useful. I kind of go,
Have you done this you do this more than once in a semester? So
I
that
have not, because it's
So
such.
they learn the first time, and then the second time they do it on a different topic, maybe it
No,
works
but they
better,
get
yeah.
they get the format of the debate beforehand, so they're not coming in cold, and that's some of what they have to get used to. But I have not done it more than once, because I always feel like I'm running out of time to fit everything in. But I think that, what I do I teach an honors class now, and I love it. It's really enjoyable, and so I try new things. I'm doing mini debates with them. So we get stuck on a concept. I go, debate time. You guys over here. You guys over here. You're the con team. You're the pro team, and they have to do that, and they like that. So that's where I would do that. But for these larger classrooms, I think the organization of it. Debate day is a big day, so the organization is a little exhausting. I love the student panel day. The things that they are willing to talk about and share with their students, their fellow students, is amazing.
What was the first part of that statement? You said, I love the...
Student panels.
Oh,
I mean,
student
I was
panels.
so surprised. I knew I had law enforcement. I knew I had social workers. I knew I had rehab. But for folks to get up and talk about when I was Section 35 to substance abuse treatment, I didn't know. People are going to talk about both sides of it, which is fantastic. And I've never had a student panel that there was somebody who was mugged one year over at Harbor Point and talked about how scary it was for him to come to school here after that. He was going home and at a bank machine, and everybody was just riveted. And it happened during the course of the semester. We were in class with them. I mean, so the story, and I remember this was a long time ago, and I don't have a great memory. But so it's to engage them in the criminal justice major, bring them in, give them key concepts of theory, methods, but also to, this is the social world. And it's messy in these classrooms, but they like that.
Have you taken these strategies or techniques that you've sort of been forced to discover or put into place because you've got this large lecture and you want to reach students even though you've got this large lecture? Have you taken from that back into your smaller classrooms? I mean, you just said debate time about the honors class.
Yes, so yes, the debates I have, student panels, more or less, I actually, Denise Patman does the Odyssey.
Yeah.
And you can use that skill, and so I love it for any sociology class, or for, especially these classes where there's going to be a lot of group sharing. And that Odyssey works as a panel. It's instead of, so I'm not going to have my graduate students all get up and sit in front. This is a lot. You can have them come down, sit in the stage and sit in front, and they want to do that. The graduate students don't want to do that, but they're willing to sit around a table like this. And if you tailor the Odyssey to the particular class or topic, so the honors class is institutions and transitions. What institutions have you been engaged in your life? What transitions? And then they present on that. And I think that is very similar to the panel. Guests, absolutely. The network of UMB alumni that do outstanding things in these areas.
So I have an overarching question that I'm sorry, was somebody else have their hand up?
I just want to ask a question about the debates in small situations. Like I do that with my freshman seminar courses, we put on different things like if we're on the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, we'll debate whether her family should get remuneration for the blood that they gave and also their mother's cells, versus the physicians that will battle back and forth. But what's always difficult sometimes is you have 2 or 3 lead debaters that will go back and forth. How do you switch off and get everybody involved?
So I think sometimes you can have more, with the mini debates, it's interesting because they all look to the same person speaking of, come on, everybody, you all know how to speak. With the debates, the way it's structured, again, with the presentation, one person does the main presentation, then there's the question from the opposing team, and then there's a rebuttal. They get to regroup before their rebuttal, and when they talk to each other, they work out who really knows what our rebuttal is, and it's not always the same person, and they sort of work as a team, and so that's been a lucky happenstance. I think in the smaller, immediate, I'm throwing it out to you to do immediately, that's when they all look around like, oh no. So, and so for that involves some encouragement on your part, pointing out, let's spread the wealth, let's see, does anybody else, but in the way of, in structuring the assignment, you can say not different person. And the debates are wild, and because when the teams get up to 12, there will be, somebody back there with a baseball cap shuffling through papers. And it's mostly research, but they look like they really are, contributing. So
Well, you can't. If you expect 100%.
All right, that's why the whole normal curve.
I was just going to say, it is interesting to hear these different perspectives, and it's funny that I hear the same, we all have the same problems, even though these different subjects. I mean, when you mentioned getting to read deeply,
Writing.
That's true for science. I hadn't really thought about it in English so much, but it's definitely true in science as well. And I remember having students who come to me and say, I've read the entire book. They'll bring the book with them, show that every line is highlighted. And yet they don't understand a thing. They don't know how to read deeply. I have no idea how to solve that. I mean, I'm getting what your comment about asking them maybe in class to read a paragraph and tell us what's the key point of that paragraph. Maybe something like that would work.
Yeah, no, I got to the point where I showed them. I put up a passage on, again, did it in real time, put it up on a document camera, where I said, when I look at this paragraph, I want to circle the key concept words. And I showed them as I was reading that I circled key word. I mean, this is, again, a literary text, so it's got a certain level of interest to it because there's some sort of interesting plot dynamic or a key symbol or something like that in there.
Well, that's in the science. We have plot dynamics.
But you know what I mean? I'm trying to show them that there's something in there that's worth them sort of finding that that's the key element that they should be zeroing in on a bit. And And then, jotting some questions in the margin as they're reading, and I tried to show them that a little bit.
Well, even knowing what to mark, because when everything's highlighted, it's the same as nothing's highlighted, right? Because knowing what to highlight, right?
Right.
Even that's a skill that we have that they don't. Maybe you want
You
to.
have a comment.
I'm teaching in the nursing, and the whole large classroom is really important as well. I teach maternity and women's health. And when I get there, first off, the dynamics of the class, because it sometimes is content that can be very religious-based, culturally based, and I start with the jokes. But we do STDs. I've had students ask me not to put the pictures up. We don't want to see it. It's like you need to see this. You have to be able to recognize it. I talk about the dynamics. I have a hard time with them also reading the text. When they come in after an exam, they go to the TA, and after the TA, I have one TA, which we've just started in the last 3 years, for 5 hours. And they'll start there and then come to me and they'll say, I read the whole book, so I get the whole book in the different color highlights. I'll say, well, what's the key word? They can't read the question. It's like, did you underline the key question? But what I've started to do, because I was like, you don't get what this is about. I have to cover a minimum of 100 pages a night in our text. They have an ATI exam, which is at the end of the course. In order to get out of the nursing school now, they need to take a HESI exam with a passing grade. And then if they do, then they can graduate. And sometimes it's not a happy time of graduation around our place. And then they take the NCLEX. And every time you go to try to pull something back, it shows up in the NCLEX exam, which is the state licensure exam. I've tried so many different ways to do things that they can read, and I am looking. They're a computer-generated generation, and they don't like to read anymore. So what I have started is, and it started with the science people, my nursing lab and my math lab and my science lab. And like you, I have a due before class. Now there is so much, they're about ready to hang me. Tomorrow's our exam. It's on 13 chapters. They're heavy chapters. It's labor and delivery, which is a language unto itself, and every complication. But I have them read the book. And one of them, after the first exam, this past exam, came out of the room and said, I didn't realize you wanted us to read the book as well. And I said, that $125 that you spent was really worth it. So how did you take the pre-test and post-test for my nursing lab? Well, I took the pre-test, I go A, and then it automatically goes over and it gives me a teaching guide, and it corrects before I can take the post-test. It brings me back exactly in the book. So I figure out from that what's important. And then I take the post-test. Now I'm giving them 5% for the post-test, because if they're doing the chapter well, it takes them at least 2 hours to do just the pre-test, post-test. And sometimes we're covering 3 chapters in a night. I don't know what else to do. I do the groups in the beginning. We talk about culture, maternity and culture, and I try getting them in groups. When I try to use their lab, what you use for a lab, because they're all out, we have 13 clinical groups, and I try to bring in their lab placements. But different hospitals, they see different things, and
I think for the reading comprehension, I would just offer the suggestion, now you can say this all you want, and few students will actually do it, but I think it's really important for them to learn these note-taking skills where they actually have to sit with a pen and paper, because I think if they're just highlighting what's already there, or just looking at what's already been prefabbed through like a testing module, they're not actually being forced to have it go in their head and then come out. And I think trying to get them to get into some sort of habit of being a translator, where they're translating those ideas into their own language in some kind of a written format, and becoming comfortable with them coming up with their own terminology to handle the concepts they're learning, and also to do the sort of messy note-taking we're all used to. Like my notes from today, I've got weird squares and arrows, and I think that's some of what they're missing when they're always just on the computer screen. And I think for some of the students, you convince them to take a little time, just a little bit of time, to start taking some notes in their own handwriting. They see that there's a really big payoff right away.
And they do. They do that with their conference. They have to do one clinical conference, so they have to, and I make it directly from the book, so that every week out of the 13 groups, they're all doing the same conference, and it should be around the time that we're covering it in class. But it's,
Yeah, I want to just say that you can assign those hundreds of pages.
oh, I know.
Students
Your
think-
class
and
meets once a week, right?
Once a week, Wednesdays,
So
they've
it's
been
not
here,
like-
but they
it's
have
100
their.
pages a week.
And
Right.
students do think that they are doing those hundreds of pages, especially if you open the textbook and you see their yellow highlighter under every single line. That is just not reading, it's just that students think they're reading.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
so there's gotta be another way in which you at least get them to connect with something. Not all they're not gonna connect to the hundreds of pages.
Exactly.
But they need to connect with something. And so one of the things that Cheryl was talking about, marking up a passage, or doing what some of us in English do, which is the double entry note, where you ask students to actually copy out a passage that for them, speaks to them, that this particular passage resonates for them for some reason. They may know someone who has experienced this. They may know something about this, or this is a totally new phenomenon they've never thought about. So they take this passage and then they write a response to it. They are going to connect to that passage. Are they going to connect in that dynamic way to everything in those hundreds of pages? Of course not. But they will connect to something. And if you've got students in small groups after reading chapters 1 through 3 to talk about which passage or which aspect of the reading they responded to and started sharing that in a small group, then you have this opportunity for Cheryl to hear what Cheryl wrote about, and the importance of this reading, or the sort of significance of something they could take away from the readings, starts spreading. And they can go back into the reading now, having heard Cheryl's response and Steffi's response to this section that they didn't respond to at all, and now the reading becomes a truly rich experience. But there's got to be something that happens besides just assigning the reading, because they really do think they're doing it.
Right.
And if you ask them, in class, did you do the reading? Yeah, and then, got the yellow page, the highlighted stuff. But there's got to be an interaction.